We know this NHL offseason is going to be nuts, but what are the latest trade rumors surrounding some of the biggest names available? Well, Frank Seravalli released his top trade targets for the 2023 NHL offseason, and there are some juicy names and some juicy info. But what are the latest trade rumors? Well, make sure you watch till the end for every single rumor discussed, and hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey trade content just like this. So much is going to be getting released on a daily basis in the offseason, and you won't want to miss it. But now going on to Frank Seravalli's top 25 trade targets article, the summer of Chevy, Winnipeg Jets, Hellebuyck, Scheifele, Dubois, and Blake Wheeler join trade targets. And there's a lot of names that we've seen before with some great new info, but a lot of new spicy names added onto the top 25 trade bait board, and a lot of new players to discuss. Now, as Frank Seravalli mentioned in the last article, this trade period might be even more active for a number of reasons, including a weak free agent class, and then mentions that in the top 50 trade bait board prior to the deadline, 42 of those players ended up getting traded right at the end. And you see for the trade targets, the number one player still on the board is Erik Karlsson, who again goes through everything. And with that 4 more season contract, $11.5 million AAV, it'd obviously take a lot to make a trade happen, but it still seems like Erik Karlsson is one of the most likely players to be traded, especially in that star caliber tier. But then we go into number 2 and Connor Hellebuyck, who has 1 more season at a $6.17 million AAV, and the first time he's on this trade bait board. With Frank Seravalli, he says this, while weighing Hellebuyck's future in Winnipeg, including whether or not he wants to re-sign with the Jets, there has to be a tempting tilt towards cashing in on Hellebuyck's high value. He's one of the most consistently excellent netminders, playing one of the most fickle positions in pro sports. Hellebuyck is coming off a season that is rivaled only by his 2020 campaign that garnered him the Vezina Trophy, and he was voted a finalist again this season for the 3rd time in 6 years. He's in his prime, under a manageable cap hit for 1 more year, and could vault a roster into serious contention. Los Angeles, New Jersey, Ottawa, Toronto, Carolina, Pittsburgh, and Vegas all have openings based on play or contractual status. Now, we're going to be talking about Connor Hellebuyck a lot more in depth after this list, because there's a lot to talk about here, and also some big rumors regarding specific teams going after him that we're going to talk about as well. As for number 3, it's Kevin Hayes, which we saw in the last ranking as well. And again, considering just how much Philadelphia is changing right now, even though that cap would be a pretty big problem, I could see some pretty big salary retention there. As for number 4, you see Mark Scheifele coming onto the list. Scheifele and Blake Wheeler and co. have had plenty of kicks at the can in Winnipeg, and it seems as if massive changes are coming onto the Canadian prairie. Scheifele is coming off a career high in goals in 42, and his hockey IQ is off the charts. Coupled with a paltry $6 million cap hit, there should be no shortage of suitors lining up to prime out of Winnipeg. So many teams in the NHL are starved for center depth, and a pivot like Scheifele could significantly change one of their outlooks heading into next season. And with Scheifele, again, we talked about it in the players that will be traded video a few days back, but to me, Scheifele has so many different possibilities, again, because of just like Hellebuyck having only 1 more season left on his deal at, again, a very, very good AAV, and with how good of a goal scorer he was this last year, and you can see, again, the playmaking skill over the years, so many teams are going to be after him, even if that defensive game might not be where they want it to be. If you put him in like kind of a sheltered offensive role, Scheifele would be a wonderful target to go after, especially if you're fine keeping him for just 1 season. Just like last time, Evgeny Kuznetsov comes in at number 5. Number 6 is JT Miller. Pierre-Luc Dubois comes in at number 7. And talking about the situation we know there as well, Dubois needs a new deal, and he mentioned the Canadians last time. We also saw the defenseman and Ross Colton last ranking. But here comes at number 10, a pretty big new name in John Gibson of the Anaheim Ducks. Now, I was kind of a little bit reluctant to actually put him on my players that would be traded. He was close to making it, but here he comes in number 10 on Frank Seravalli's trade bait board at 4 more seasons at a $6.4 million AAV. Now, Frank Seravalli says this, Gibson has let the Ducks know that after 10 seasons, he is ready for a change of scenery. With little defensive support, Gibson was tagged with the worst statistical season of his career. Amazingly, Gibson's save percentage was still exactly league average, which is an indication of how much game he has left. How much better would those numbers look in a properly constructed, not rebuilding team? That's what has teams wondering. Gibson was available last summer, but at a high price. Considering the term remaining on his deal, even if his cap hit is fine, it's still a large commitment. Would the Ducks be willing to retain a chunk to get Gibson in line closer to $5 million and make a move more palatable? He makes sense as a replacement for Tristan Jarry in Pittsburgh, which happens to be Gibson's hometown. So a lot of new info on there, but as Frank Seravalli mentions as well, that term is definitely a big sticking point. Gibson is a risk, even if it might be some confidence in him turning that page. Compared to a player like Hellebuyck, I see Gibson getting just a lot less interest because of that commitment that would have to be had in a Gibson trade. Now you take a look at John Gibson's goal seed above expected. This was 2019 with a plus 26.9, an absolutely insane year. But you see since then a -9, and now this last year a -2. Even though the Ducks defense hasn't done John Gibson any favors, he hasn't exactly been lighting the world on fire either way. And yes, there is a chance that he just has he's more enticed to actually play better on a better team. There's probably a good chance that he's just been demoralized in Anaheim. But at the same time, if you're going on what he's done the past few seasons, if he continues that play, it's not going to be a good time, especially at that term and that AAV. But if we do see John Gibson get to those prime numbers again, then absolutely it would be a trade worth making. And then we go on to number 11 and another really fascinating name here, Taylor Hall of the Boston Bruins, who has 2 more seasons left on his deal at a $6 million cap hit. And this is what Frank Seravalli had to say about Hall. The Bruins cap picture would indicate Hall's cap hit is a luxury Boston cannot afford. The complicating factor for Boston is a $4.5 million salary cap overage that will be placed on next year's books by virtue of the Bergeron and Krejci earned performance bonuses. So whatever next year's cap ends up being, take $4.5 million off the top. Then factor in that they'll need to sign nearly half of their roster and might try to keep a trade acquisition like Tyler Bertuzzi, and the dollars get stretched thin in a hurry. Hall was strong in round 1, but his regular season production at that cap hit is less than ideal. He has a 10-team no-trade list. And this was interesting, I think, right before, honestly, Hall went off in the playoffs because, as you can see, he got 36 points in 61 games. He was fine in the regular season, but definitely not worth that $6 million cap hit for the Bruins, and especially considering their situation, Hall was just in a weird spot. Then the playoffs came, and then he was absolutely electric for that first round and was one of the best Boston Bruins, and that kind of muddied the waters a little bit, but it still doesn't change that for the most part, Hall has just kind of been average in that position, in that AAV. And considering again just how good Bertuzzi was there, and if he is healthy next year, how probably solid he would do in the regular season as well, and Boston's situation is kind of all over the place. Now, in an article by NHLTradeRumors.com, they list 3 different spots that Taylor Hall could end up going to: the New Jersey Devils, the Columbus Blue Jackets, and the Pittsburgh Penguins. To me, I think the Pittsburgh Penguins would make the most sense, since especially, again, their cap situation is kind of fluid right now for $20 million in the works. And even if they do re-sign Zucker, there's still some room there to bring in a player like Taylor Hall and even maybe get another goaltender if it is going to be a player like Connor Hellebuyck. So the Penguins have a lot of flexibility, and I think a player like Hall would be really interesting in Pittsburgh, but we'll have to see what ends up happening. I feel like there would still be a lot of interest for Hall, especially considering, like what the contract says, he really only has 2 more years in his contract, so if it doesn't work out, it's not the worst, it's not the biggest deal in the world, really. But let's take a second here to talk about today's sponsor in Babbel, the all-in-one language learning app that teaches you how to speak, read, and listen in new languages. And it can teach you in multiple ways with lessons, games, videos, content about the cultures, and Babbel Live with top teachers. Any way you want to learn, you can do it. I've always wanted to learn French so I could understand what the Montreal Canadiens top brass are saying at any moment's notice, and with Babbel, just 10 minutes a day can get you on track. To learn a new language with Babbel, just click the link below, and when you use my link, you'll get 60% off. So click the Babbel link below and start learning a new language today. Every bit helps the channel, and thank you so much, Babbel, for sponsoring today's video. Then going on to number 12 and number 13, Adam Henrique and Sean Walker, 2 names that were in the last ranking, as well as Matt Grzelcyk at number 14. But a new one here, and a pretty interesting one for me, is Anthony Mantha of the Washington Capitals. And you can see 1 more season at $5.7 million AAV. I had him in my 15 players that I thought would be traded this offseason. And to me, he's one of the most likely cap dumps for Washington. And you can see the Capitals have openly engaged teams with the availability of Kuznetsov and Mantha, looking to shake things up and create some salary cap flexibility in the process. process. Mantha is a big man, 6'5", who has high-end skill, as evidenced by his 24 and 25 goal seasons with the Red Wings. But those were 5 years ago now, and Mantha has struggled mightily in Washington. And that cap hit is onerous now relative to production. The Caps are looking to have someone take Mantha off their hands, but he may cost an asset as a sweetener to achieve. And that's honestly not all too surprising. I mean, Mantha has not shown really much in the way of improvement or reboundingness or really anything that would show that he's going to be taking that next step back to where he was. I could definitely see the Caps having to give up maybe a pick, maybe like a third-round pick to get rid of Mantha, maybe even a second, honestly. That $5.7 million AAV is just horrible for what Mantha brings. But there is something I still think that can be unlocked. He is still 28. That's not horrible, but it does still feel like Mantha has kind of fallen off a cliff in so many ways. We'll see if he can pull himself out of it, but I could see a lot of teams that have a lot of cap space adding that sweetener, liking a player like Mantha still on the team and hoping that he rebounds well. And you look at the teams with the most cap space heading into this offseason, and I just got to say, for Detroit, if they still like the player and the person in Mantha, why not go after Mantha, get a sweetener as well, potentially in this upcoming draft, and get with that $30 million in cap space, maybe add a player who can be a part of that middle six. And even if he doesn't work out, then who the heck cares? Same thing could end up happening as well for the New Jersey Devils, who have $34 million in cap space. They have a lot of cap space to work with, and they can afford to bring out a player for one more season that has maybe a little bit more of a overpriced contract, but has the potential to rebound. Same thing with maybe a team like the Carolina Hurricanes wanting to add some pop goal scoring wise. We'll see. There's a lot of teams out there that do have a lot of flexibility heading into this offseason, and I don't think Mantha is going to be a player that, especially with a sweetener added, will not have many suitors. I think there will be a lot of teams interested if that sweetener does come, which I think Washington will have to add. Now going on to number 16 and 17 on the Yamamoto and Granlund, two names we saw before, but two players that will be really interesting to look at, especially Mikael Granlund, who I don't really see being traded unless there's some heavy sweeteners going past Pittsburgh. But also number 18 is on Provorov, who was also in the last ranking, but again, is a player that I think is a sneaky addition for a team if he's going to rebound well. But I think he's a player that not a lot of people realize will likely be traded this year, but I think is definitely going to be on the move. And then at number 19 is Blake Wheeler of the Winnipeg Jets, and with one more season of $8.25 million cap hit, Frank Seravalli says this: "It's difficult to envision a path back for Wheeler in Winnipeg, particularly after he was openly critical of coach Rick Bowness's post-mortem playoff interview when he said that Bowness was too hard publicly on the team. Despite having the C ripped off his jersey last September, Wheeler still wielded a significant influence on the Jets dressing room. It's time for the Jets to cut bait. Last summer, they touted Wheeler as the missing link to a contending team and were unwilling to retain salary to move him. That was to happen this time around for the Jets to finally turn over control to Josh Morrissey, Kyle Connor, and Nikolai Ehlers." So a lot of new juicy info on the Winnipeg Jets. With Wheeler specifically, a lot of it comes down to that cap hit at 8.25. Even though he does have one more year remaining, that cap hit is sizable, and it keeps a lot, I think, from happening, especially considering his age at 36 years old. He can still be one of the better playmakers in the league for sure. 39 assists in 72 games this year. But for a lot of teams, if there's no salary retention, that's going to be one of the biggest risks they make, if not the biggest risk they make this next offseason. And considering that, it really, I think, keeps a lot of trade interest from happening. With Scheifele and Hellebuyck both around $6 million, Blake Wheeler at 8.25 is steep, and that's being generous. Then at 20 and 21, two names we also saw before in Tyler Myers and Kevin LeBanc. And then we go on to number 22, and this one is really interesting to me, and this is first round picks. Columbus 22nd overall and St. Louis 25th and 29th overall. We've reported on the availability of these picks, as it will be shocking if Blues GM Doug Armstrong is walking to the podium all three times in the first round in Nashville. The Blues are looking to move the picks they got for Ryan O'Reilly and Vladimir Tarasenko in exchange for 25-year-old and younger players who can make an impact on their team with cost control. And the Blue Jackets, who have an extra pick with the Vladislav Gavrikov trade to Los Angeles, are also in search for more help, preferably on the blue line, to vault themselves back into playoff contention after an incredibly difficult season. So some really big news on first round picks in this upcoming draft, and teams with that surplus, you can see with Columbus as well as St. Louis. The Blues make a lot of sense. I mean, I would also be surprised if they pick all three times, especially especially with that 29th overall pick. I could definitely see the Blues moving that for another middle six player, perhaps. I think for them, adding onto that defense would be the biggest thing for me if I'm going to go after anybody. But they also have a lot of players with a lot of no movement clauses and a lot of solidifiedness and not a lot of buyout potential either. So for St. Louis, they're kind of stuck in a weird position where I think they should go after a couple of guys that they probably can't go for. Columbus, though, desperately needs somebody on the defense. But at the same time, I still think they shouldn't trade any of their first round picks. I mean, look in the position they're in, but they're signing Mike Babcock, so who knows what the heck they're doing over there in Ohio. Now, that's it for Frank Seravalli's top 25 trade bait board, but not it for the trade rumors, especially on Daily Faceoff. This from Matt Larkin. We were going to talk about Connor Hellebuyck a lot more in this video, and now is the time, because Matt Larkin put out 7 trade destinations for Connor Hellebuyck and for the Winnipeg Jets to potentially watch. And there is some fascinating names here on potential fits for Hellebuyck and what we could see this offseason. I mean, considering, again, that lack of real term with Hellebuyck, it makes his price a little bit less, and it also means a lot more teams are going to be a lot more comfortable, not just going after him and wanting to make a trade happen, but actually making a trade happen. Now, for Matt Larkin, the first team that he has as a Connor Hellebuyck trade option is the Carolina Hurricanes. And why he makes sense, the Hurricanes, like every team in the Florida Panthers wake this season, lost to a superior goalie in the Eastern Conference Final. They have not been able to zero in on one consistent, reliable starter for several seasons now, alienating between the brittle duo of Anderson and Raanta while giving occasional looks to youngster Kochetkov. They have Kochetkov signed to a 4-year extension beginning in 2024, but Anderson and Raanta are set to walk as UFAs. Hellebuyck in the alpha role of Kochetkov backing him up would instantly become an elite goaltending apprenticeship, but goes on to say keeping pucks out of the net is not Carolina's problem, and going on to say how good they've been defensively and how good of a fit they've been. What Carolina missed most of this postseason was game-breaking goal scoring, with top snipers Svechnikov and Pacioretty having suffered season-ending injuries. If Don Waddell is to expand assets in pursuit of a major roster upgrade this offseason, the biggest team need comes at forward and not in net. And I would personally agree with some of this. I mean, you can see just how well Anderson and Raanta have done in the positions they've gone in because of how good systematically Carolina is in net. And I don't think there's a guy that they necessarily need in net to get over the top. Hellebuyck would obviously be incredible, but they've been doing so well in that department when they are healthy. The problem is that Raanta and Anderson consistently have never been healthy and have never been good enough in those spots. And I feel like Carolina is in a position where they could still go after a relatively cheap guy, maybe even an Aiden Hill type of player in this offseason, and still work it out pretty well. But that goal scoring was just completely decimated versus Florida, and they needed more of it. And that's been the consistent theme all throughout all these last playoffs, is that lack of top-end scoring. That's what Carolina needs to solve first, so I would agree there. The next name Larkin mentions is the LA Kings, going through the acquisitions they've gotten, and the surprise surge from journeyman Phoenix Copley, and some excellent play from trade deadline acquisition Jonas Korpisalo patched over the problem for the Kings, but Korpisalo turned into a pumpkin during round 1 of the playoffs and is a pending UFA now. The Kings could take a chance on him again, but he's nowhere near the sure thing Hellebuyck is. He would instantly elevate them into the division's upper crust alongside Vegas and Edmonton. And then the fly in the ointment, on paper, the Kings are already committed to almost $75 million in cap spending for next season. If they wanted to take on Hellebuyck's $6 million and re-sign defenseman Gavrikov, Rob Blake likely must find a way to unload Peterson's $5 million cap bid. Not an easy task given how much his game has imploded. And just a lot of different things there for LA. And again, that goaltending situation is just all over the place. They have to move Peterson, man. It's just ruining every single thing about the LA Kings right now. The next name, and another name that we've seen a lot float around, is the New Jersey Devils, talking about the Devils being a Stanley Cup frontrunner. And after Vitek Vanacek provided a dud in the first round, Akira Schmid guided the Devils past New York Rangers with some stellar play, but he had an .874 save percentage in round 2's loss versus Carolina, with Vanacek carrying a somewhat palatable cap at $3.4 million, and Schmid still waivers exempt for 2024. There's theoretical room for Hellebuyck, and then goes on to say the 2023 offseason will spike the pressure on Fitzgerald to a level he hasn't encountered yet. He has 2 high-profile RFAs to sort out and brought in Meyer, neither of whom will come remotely cheap, and right shot blue liner Devon Severson is set to hit the open market as arguably the top available blue line asset in a depressed UFA market. The Devils project to have more than $34 million in cap space, which sounds exciting, but they have just 5 forwards and 5 defensemen signed for next season. Are we sure they have the cap space to chase a vanity goalie? And interesting notes there. I mean, the cap space is fantastic, but they do have a lot of work to do this offseason. It's going to be a heck hectic one in New Jersey, but there's also a pretty big chance that they still go for the same goaltending tandem next year. And then going on to the next team in the Ottawa Senators, it's close to put up or shut up time for GM Pierre Dorian and coach DJ Smith after an aggressive 2022 offseason. Talbot and Anton Forsberg both getting hurt, forcing the Sens to rely on prospects Zugard and Metalese before they were necessarily ready for NHL duty. With Josh Norris helping next season and everything regarding the defense, getting the elusive marquee goalie would level up Ottawa to wildcard contender status at worst. And then says the status of RFA sniper Alex DeBrincat could impact whether Ottawa is a realistic suitor for Hellebuyck in more ways than one. If he signs an extension, it will presumably eat up at least half the Sens' $17 million in current cap space. If it becomes clear he doesn't want to sign, it changes everything. He could become an asset Ottawa uses as part of a play for Hellebuyck. And I would say, honestly, we could see a potential DeBrincat Hellebuyck type of exchange. I'm not sure who would have to give up more. Maybe the Jets would have to give up more. I'm not really quite sure, but a DeBrincat Hellebuyck trade would be absolutely insane. And then the Pittsburgh Penguins, we know why the Pittsburgh Penguins make sense. It would not surprise me at all if Kyle Dubas ends up going for him. The Toronto Maple Leafs would be absolutely insane, and with their goaltending situation would not surprise me either. They're kind of completely in flux right now, but I think Brad Treliving does need to make quite a few big moves here. And hey, Connor Hellebuyck would definitely bring some major stability there, even if the playoffs haven't been perfect in Hellebuck's end. And then the Vegas Golden Knights, interestingly, of course, you see Adin Hill doing fantastic things there, but we know that Adin Hill is likely not going to stay. He's probably going to get a pretty big payday in this year's offseason since he is a UFA. Bringing in Hellebuyck onto that goaltending tandem would be really quite fascinating, especially since Vegas has so many different guys in flux. But some fascinating names in on Hellebuyck, and we're definitely going to see him traded this offseason. We're going to see some fireworks regarding it, though, and all the trade rumors we're going to be discussing throughout this offseason leading up to the eventual Hellebuyck trade. But hopefully you guys did enjoy today's episode. If you did enjoy, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Comment down below, what do you guys think of all the trade rumors we discussed today? And of course, share the video with all the hockey fans you guys know online. Click this card for all my trade rumor content right in one playlist. My name is Nathan, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.